The cards hadn't been dealt yet, but the killing had already begun. March 18th, 1955. The Carlyle Hotel penthouse, 35th floor. Manhattan's most exclusive address where presidents stayed and secrets were buried. But tonight, this wasn't about politics. This was about power. And in the smoky haze of imported cigars and aged whiskey, 5 men sat around a table that could either forge peace or ignite the bloodiest war New York had ever seen. Bumpy Johnson arrived last. He always arrived last. Not because he was late, but because walking into a room full of killers required timing. The elevator operator, a nervous Italian kid who probably had 3 families depending on his silence, avoided eye contact as the brass doors slid open. Bumpy stepped into the penthouse wearing his trademark charcoal suit, silver watch chain catching the amber light from crystal chandeliers. No bodyguards, no weapons visible, just a man who understood that real power doesn't announce itself. The penthouse belonged to Vincent Gigante, but tonight it was neutral territory. 50,000 square feet of marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, and enough surveillance gaps to hide a dozen bodies. The main room had been cleared except for one piece of furniture, a circular mahogany table, custom-made in Sicily, surrounded by 6 leather chairs. 5 were occupied. Frank Costello sat with his back to the windows, a calculated risk that showed confidence. The Prime Minister of the Underworld, they called him. At 64, Costello was wearing a navy pinstripe suit that cost more than most men made in a year. His gray hair was slicked back, revealing the face that had negotiated with judges, senators, and presidents. Next to him, Vincent Gigante, 27 years old but already feared throughout Little Italy. The Chin, they called him, and he had earned that name with his fists before he earned it with his mind. Across from them sat 2 men who'd flown in from Chicago specifically for this game. Anthony Accardo, who'd inherited Al Capone's organization and made it more efficient, more brutal. Next to him, Sam Battaglia, whose reputation for creative violence had reached legendary status even in New York circles. Neither man had spoken since arriving 3 hours earlier. They didn't need to. Their presence was message enough. And now Bumpy Johnson, the only black man ever invited to sit at this particular table, took the empty chair, the one facing the door with clear sight lines to every entrance. Old habits, prison habits, survival habits. "Gentlemen," Costello said, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "Before we begin, let's establish the rules." The table held $2 million in cash, clean bills counted twice, stacked in neat bundles next to each player's position. But this wasn't just poker. This was negotiation by other means. Each hand represented territory. Each bet was a statement about whose rules would govern the streets of New York for the next decade. The winner wouldn't just take money, he'd take respect. And in their world, respect was the only currency that mattered. 5-card stud, Costello continued. No limit. But before any of us touch these cards, we need to understand what we're really playing for. Gigante leaned forward, his massive frame making the Italian leather chair creak. "Harlem," he said quietly. "That's what this is about." Bumpy's expression didn't change, but everyone at that table felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. Harlem wasn't just territory to him. It was home. It was family. It was the kingdom he'd built with blood, intelligence, and a code that even his enemies respected. "Explain," Bumpy said. One word. Delivered like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Accardo spoke for the first time since arriving. His Chicago accent was thick, vowels flattened by wind off Lake Michigan. "Numbers rackets generating $8 million annually in your neighborhood alone. Policy banks, protection money, legitimate businesses that depend on your oversight. We want in." "You've wanted in for 20 years, Bumpy replied. "Dutch Schultz wanted in. Look how that ended. Schultz was dead, shot to pieces in a New Jersey tavern in 1935. Everyone at the table knew the story. Everyone at the table knew who was responsible, though it had never been proven in any court that mattered. Battaglia smiled, revealing gold teeth that caught the light like warning flares. "This isn't 1935, Johnson. Times change. Power shifts." "Not in Harlem." Costello held up his hand, a gesture that could stop wars or start them. "That's exactly why we're here, to avoid misunderstandings, to establish cooperation." He gestured to the money. $400,000 each. Winner takes all. But more importantly, the winner sets the terms for how business operates north of 110th Street for the next 5 years. The silence stretched like a held breath. Outside, Manhattan hummed with 8 million people going about their lives, oblivious to the fact that their city's future was being decided by 5 men and a deck of cards. Bumpy picked up his whiskey glass, Hennessy, neat, and took a slow sip. When he set it down, his decision was made. Deal the cards. The first dealer was neutral, a professional brought in from Las Vegas, who dealt for every major mob family on the West Coast. His hands moved with mechanical precision, cards snapping onto the felt with mathematical rhythm. The game began quietly, conservatively. Small bets, careful raises, each man studying not just his cards, but the men holding them. For the first hour, it was almost civilized. Costello told stories about the old days, when Lucky Luciano was running New York and bootleggers were kings. Gigante barely spoke, but his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every gesture, every tell, every sign of weakness or strength. The Chicago men played like machines, emotionless and efficient. And Bumpy played like he lived, patient, observant, waiting for the moment when patience became power. The shift came during the 7th hand. The pot was already at $180,000 when Costello raised it to $250,000. A bet that said he either had the nuts or the balls to bluff with $250,000. Gigante folded immediately. The Chicago boys studied their cards, studied Costello's face, and folded as well. Bumpy called. 2 pair, kings over 8s. Costello showed 3 7s. "Lucky cards," Costello said, as he pulled the money toward his stack. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Bumpy replied. That's when everyone realized they weren't just playing poker. They were playing with Bumpy Johnson, a man who'd been reading faces and calculating odds since he was 10 years old on the streets of Charleston. A man who'd survived Alcatraz not by being the toughest, but by being the smartest. By the 10th hand, the stakes had doubled. By the 15th, they'd forgotten about money entirely. This was personal now. This was about who controlled the most valuable real estate in America. This was about whether the Italian families could expand north, or whether Harlem would remain an independent kingdom. The cards were running cold for everyone except Costello. His stack had grown to over $800,000. He was winning too much, too consistently, with hands that defied mathematical probability. And Bumpy was watching everything, the way Costello's fingers moved when he dealt, the slight pause before certain cards appeared, the almost imperceptible communication with the professional dealer. "Your deal," Costello said, sliding the cards to Bumpy. Bumpy picked up the deck, shuffled once, twice, then set them down without dealing. "Before we continue, I'd like to examine something." The room went dead quiet. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. But inside the penthouse, the only sound was 5 men breathing and the city humming 35 floors below. "Examine what?" Gigante asked. Bumpy reached across the table and picked up the deck Costello had been using. With movements so quick they were almost invisible, he spread the cards face down, then began turning them over one by one. The pattern emerged immediately. Subtle markings on the backs, pinpricks so small they were invisible unless you knew what to look for. But Bumpy knew. He'd learned to spot marked cards in prison, where a bad read could mean a knife between the ribs. "Interesting deck," Bumpy said quietly. Costello's face didn't change, but his hand moved imperceptibly toward his jacket. Gigante shifted in his chair. The Chicago men exchanged glances, and in that moment, everyone understood that they were seconds away from gunfire. "You're making a serious accusation," Costello said. "I'm making an observation." Bumpy spread 12 cards on the table, all face cards, all marked with the same tiny, precise pinpricks that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them. These markings follow a pattern. Hearts have 1 prick, diamonds have 2, clubs have 3, spades have 4. Face cards have an additional mark near the corner. The temperature in the room plummeted. Accardo's hand disappeared under the table. Battaglia's jacket fell open, revealing the shoulder holster underneath. Gigante cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking bones. But Bumpy just sat there, cards spread in front of him like evidence in a murder trial. "Now, gentlemen, we have a choice. We can pretend this is an unfortunate misunderstanding, or we can address what really happened here tonight." "What are you suggesting happened?" Costello's voice was ice. "I'm suggesting that someone attempted to steal $2 million using marked cards and a corrupted dealer. I'm suggesting that this game was rigged from the moment I walked through that door." The professional dealer started to speak, but Gigante's look silenced him. This was between the bosses now. This was about respect, reputation, and the kind of insult that usually ended with bodies in the East River. Costello leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming silently on the mahogany table. "Even if what you're suggesting were true, which I'm not saying it is, what would you propose we do about it?" Bumpy smiled for the first time all night. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that made smart men check their life insurance. "I propose we continue the game, but with a new deck and a new dealer. And if we refuse? Then I walk out of here with my $400,000, and tomorrow morning every policy banker in Harlem gets a very interesting story about how the great Frank Costello tried to cheat a poker game and got caught." The threat hung in the air like smoke. In their world, reputation was everything. A man could survive losing money, losing territory, even losing soldiers, but he couldn't survive losing respect and getting caught cheating at cards. That was the kind of story that followed a man to his grave. Costello studied Bumpy's face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of a man caught in a trap, but the genuine laugh of someone who'd just recognized a superior player. "You know what, Johnson, I respect that. Takes serious balls to call out the Prime Minister in his own city." He pushed his entire stack toward the center of the table. $800,000 in cash. "New game, clean deck, your dealer. Winner takes everything, including the respect of everyone at this table." One by one, the others followed suit. Gigante's stack, Accardo's money, Battaglia's cash, and finally, Bumpy's original $400,000. $2 million in the center of the table, and 5 men whose combined body count was higher than most small wars. The new dealer was Bumpy's choice, an elderly black man named Roosevelt Washington who'd been dealing cards in Harlem since before Prohibition. Roosevelt's hands moved like liquid over the cards, each motion precise, honest, witnessed by 5 pairs of eyes that could detect deception at 100 paces. The final hand was 5-card draw. No wild cards, no second chances, just skill, luck, and the kind of pressure that had broken stronger men than these. Roosevelt dealt 5 cards to each player. The betting started conservatively but escalated quickly. By the final round, every dollar on that table was committed. $2 million riding on 5 pieces of paper and the men holding them. Costello showed first. Full house. Kings over jacks. Gigante folded without showing. Accardo showed his cards with a disgusted grunt. 2 pair. Battaglia threw his cards down in anger. Nothing. He'd been bluffing with Jack high. All eyes turned to Bumpy Johnson, the man who'd caught them cheating, the man who'd demanded a clean game, the man who now controlled the most valuable territory in New York. Bumpy set his cards down gently, one by one, face up on the mahogany table, straight flush, 5 through 9 of hearts. The silence was absolute. Outside, New York continued its endless dance of commerce and crime, but inside that penthouse, history had just shifted. Bumpy Johnson had won not just $2 million, but something far more valuable. He'd won the respect of the most powerful men in organized crime. Costello stood up slowly and extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Johnson. I believe this concludes our business in Harlem." Bumpy shook his hand, then looked around the table at each man. "Gentlemen, I want to be clear about something. Tonight wasn't about money. It was about respect, about understanding that some territories aren't for sale at any price." He began stacking the money with methodical precision. "Harlem has always been independent. It will remain independent. But that doesn't mean we can't do business, just honest business, on terms we all understand." Over the next 6 months, the relationships forged at that poker table would reshape organized crime in New York. Bumpy maintained control of Harlem, but opened limited partnerships with the Italian families for certain operations. Money flowed more freely, violence decreased, and everyone prospered. The marked cards were never mentioned again, though the story spread through the underworld like wildfire. Frank Costello, some said, had been taught a lesson in humility by the one man in New York who couldn't be bought, threatened, or fooled. Years later, when federal investigators tried to understand how organized crime operated in 1950s New York, they could never quite figure out why Harlem remained an independent enclave. They didn't know about the poker game. They didn't know about the marked cards. They didn't know that sometimes the most important negotiations happen not in back rooms or restaurants, but around a card table where honor matters more than money. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, 13 years after that poker game. At his funeral, Frank Costello was one of the pallbearers. When someone asked him why he'd honored his former opponent that way, Costello's answer was simple. "He was the only man who ever caught me cheating and let me keep my dignity." That's not just smart. That's class. The $2 million from that poker game went toward improving Harlem. New businesses, better schools, community programs that helped young men avoid the life that had claimed so many before them. Bumpy understood something that his opponents never grasped. Real power isn't about taking everything you can grab. It's about knowing what's worth fighting for and what's worth walking away from. And sometimes it's about calling a bluff when everyone else at the table is too scared to speak the truth.